Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video we are going to be doing an artifact analysis, and the artifact which you are looking at is an inscribed runic object identified by the tag UNOR 1998, number 25. Now, this particular runic object is currently housed, I should say, at the Sigtuna Museum, but its provenance is unknown, although we know that it roughly comes from this area around the village of Sigtuna, and we know some of the other objects that were from the same find context. So this, for instance, is a carved stone from the same area, and we know that this stone is dated roughly to the 12th century based on linguistic evidence. So to comment briefly on the runes, we've got these sort of Younger Futhark runes going on here, and they haven't yet developed all of the distinctions that later medieval runes would have to distinguish different letter forms. So the distinction between B and P, for instance, using the dots is not shown there. The only sort of distinction that's made is with the U and the Y, which we can see in this Y rune down here. But for the most part, they don't use that system yet. And what we have up here is kind of interesting. We've got these like weird little, I would call them geometric designs. I don't think they're meant to be runes of any kind, and they might have added to the magical properties of this artifact because it is an artifact which, as we'll get into when we read the description, is supposed to have had some kind of magical effect, healing effect on whoever it is used for. And a quick thing to note about the runes is that they separate some of the words with these little crosses, and I would tentatively say that these colon-like markings here indicate the end of a clause or of a sentence, similar to the use of the medial points and colons in Gothic manuscripts. And there might be some kind of connection there in terms of contemporaries thinking of writing in similar kinds of ways, although I don't think there's any sort of ancestral connection there. And it's worth noting a couple of things where, for instance, here we have but hun, B-A-T-H-A-N, and so it seems that they're sort of folding the pronoun into the verb that comes before it, as in terms of how they think about the runes written on the page, written on the bone itself, although there are lots of runes written on the page, and I'm going to be doing videos about some runic inscriptions which are in fact written on manuscript pages. Very exciting stuff. Our text is somewhat fragmentary, although there probably weren't that many runes missing at the end here, probably not here either. So we can have a rough sense based on the meter and also context what this word is going to mean. So it's technically fragmentary, but we can reconstruct it to a reasonable degree. And the text seems to read roughly from this side going that way. Then we have this side going that way, and then it switches to a kind of boustrophodon because you have to turn the bone over, and then it's going this way. Although if you turn the bone over, it's reading left to right anyway, so I don't know if this really counts as boustrophodon. And so what I've done here is I've written out a transcription of this in the original runes, doing as close a transcription as I can. I've color-coded it with my gloss. I've given you a transliteration so that you can follow along, and then a glossing into standardized Old Norse. Now, what I haven't done here is shown the versification, because this is actually a poem written in Fornyrðislag, which is the sort of ancient meter commonly used in Eddic poetry and also in Old English. I haven't shown it separated out into lines, but hopefully you'll be able to hear that as I read through and tell you what it actually means. And I will roughly try to approximate the language in the runes themselves as I read through it, although forgive me if my sort of standard medieval Old Icelandic pronunciation comes in to interfere with that. So this is what it would have sounded like. Jordið úrðið vaxnar krokke, but hann rðiðu, barði hann rðiðu, áksíða sarð, sarðan, varða hafið fullt fenget, flu braut rðiða. So, what does this mean? There's so much to talk about with this here because it links into something that I'm doing for my PhD research, and I won't tell you about that just yet, but you know, this is sort of a related inscription. So, Juril Urith, this is a word which is controversial, So Juril, I'm taking this as a Swedish, or maybe even contemporary variation on the name Kirill, or Kirill, however you want to pronounce it, which is attested in British Library Cotton MS Caligula A.XV and folios 120 to 123V to 124R. So it's a runic inscription that runs along the bottom of the page there. Now, the name Kirill there is usually interpreted as comprised of two parts in Old Norse, meaning gor, which is related to our English word gore or blood, although it also seems to mean sort of bile and pus in certain contexts. But in compound words, I would hesitate to say that the word gore in Old Norse means something more like blood or slaughter, because we have a word Gormonother in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, which is the month of November, which in Old English is described as, oh goodness, I think it's Blotmonath, which is like blood month or sacrifice month or slaughter month, because in that month people slaughter their animals during the sort of winter hibernation, so to speak. So the prefix, I should say, gur, probably means gore or blood in this context, and then the ill is a suffix in Old Norse, and there's also el in Old English, which means like an agent noun, so a thing that causes something. So in this case, juril probably means a thing which causes gore, a thing which causes slaughter perhaps, and it's in the genitive case here, as we can tell by this s here at the end, so jurvils. So whatever we're dealing with here, it's of Ural. And then this word here I'm taking as a nominative, and my suspicion is that it means an untwisting, literally, or an untwist. Now, rith means twist, and then the o prefix in Old Norse would mean un. So it's a bit of a weird word. Scholars have had difficulty in understanding what it means. I sort of read this as a reference to septicemia. My sort of rough interpretation is that Erith without the O in front of it would mean a twisting, as in a twisting up of maybe the blood at the site of a cut of an injury, which would cause it to scab over and therefore heal. And this ureth would refer to an untwisting or a non-twisting at the site of a wound. So it's a wound that is not healing. And the reason it's not healing is because this untwisting is possessed by ureth. It's caused by this probably demon called Uril, who prevents wounds from healing. And part of the reason I think ureth here is a nominative neuter is because the sort of participle vaxna that comes after it. Now, again, this is difficult to translate because vaxna can either be the strong feminine form, which would imply that it belongs to a totally different word, or it can be the weak neuter form. And the difficulty here would be that the weak adjectives in Old Norse come after or with a definite article, and we don't really have that here. I'm wondering if maybe it's meant to imply a definite article which has been cut out for metrical purposes, because you have although fornirðislag can be a little bit flexible in how many syllables it has per line, you still don't want to, I guess, knock off the flow of the poetry too much, because Jurils orðið vaxna og krokke, it's got a nice rhythm to it, and if it was something like Jurils orðið þitt vaxna og krokke, it may not flow as well, perhaps, in the poet's mind. So I'm reading vaxna here as a weak past participle, meaning a thing which has grown, and a weak neuter participle, more specifically. Going with urith. So the first three words would mean Ural's untwisting, which has grown. And then we've got this dative phrase, ur kroki, which I'm reading here as meaning out of kroki. Now, most scholars who look at this seem to interpret kroki as a name, something like krokr, and it is a name that's attested in Old Norse. I'm sort of reading it with a more literal interpretation, which would mean out of the hook here, because it's in the dative, and well, it would be in the dative anyway, even if it was a name. But I'm personally somewhat skeptical of these kinds of healing bones being addressed to a specific person. In researching these bones, and if you think about it, these kinds of runic objects which have a magical incantation that's meant to be used for a person, it doesn't make a massive amount of sense, because it's somewhat of an investment to carve these into a bone. It doesn't make that much sense to make an artifact whose inscription refers to healing a specific person, which can therefore maybe only be used for that specific person. And indeed, if you look at other, even pagan inscriptions, and I would hesitate at saying that this either is pagan or it could fit in with the pagan context, because there's no apparent reference to Christianity here. So a text which can fit in these contexts is the Merseburg charms, which I'm going to do a video about at some point in the future. And the Merseburg charms, if you look in the manuscript themselves, they actually have this N with 2 dots on either side, and that's an abbreviation in the manuscript for either the Latin nomen or the Old High German namo, which is name, and it's literally like you insert the name of whoever you're reciting this incantation for at the end of the incantation, so that the person will be healed by the spell. And for that reason, I find it difficult to believe that they would refer to this untwisting of Ural, which has arisen out of a man called Croaky. I think this is saying that the untwisting caused by Ural has arisen out of an injury caused by a hook, or maybe it's even related to a part of the body which bends, such as maybe the knee or elbow. It's hard to say for sure. I don't think elbow, because there's a separate word for that, but I don't think Croaky is a name, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So this first bit, I'm taking it as meaning Ural's untwisting rose out of the hook. It might refer to maybe a fishing hook that got stuck in someone's skin. And then we have a new clause with different kind of alliteration. So, bat han ridu means he beat or he hit the fever, basically. And I must confess personally, in terms of being candid about my interpretation, is that the fact that it references Han here does strengthen the case for Kroki being a name, an individual's personal name. But it could also refer to just a general person, you know? So, Bat Han Ridu means he beat the fever. Bardi Han Ridu, he struck the fever. Ok Sida Sarth Sarda Ran. Now this bit is a bit more difficult to translate. So Oxida is just and then. Sarth, now this is a funny one. So it means to hit, but it sort of means to hit in a very like vulgar sexual sense, in the sense that we might say today, oh, I hit that. If you're being particularly gross in referring to having had sex with someone. So there's some degree of like sexual innuendo going on here. And afterwards he fucked, if you want to say that, the Sara Ran. Now this word is quite difficult to translate. I'm taking it here as meaning Sara in the genitive plural, meaning of sores or of injuries or of wounds. And then Ran, which is a somewhat rare poetic word for a house or a dwelling. And so I'm wondering if maybe this, house of souls maybe refers to a sort of site on his body, a pustule, where there was a lot of swelling, perhaps. That's my suspicion, and that suspicion is strengthened by what comes next, which is Varda haver fult finget, which means he has fully received the Varda. Now, Varda is somewhat of a complicated word in Old Norse. It's only attested a couple of times. This is, in fact, one of about 2 or 3 references in the entire Old Norse corpus that I've found to the word Varda. It is attested in a 14th century Icelandic medical treatise, where it says that if you have a a sort of swelling of congealed blood, if you cut that swelling, it says, what comes out is vatten men kalla vara, the water which men call vara. And this leads me to a couple of different interpretations of what it is. One of them is a relatively simple one, that vara is just a kind of pus. And that is normally what I see scholars translating vara as when it comes up in, for instance, the Runic charm in Caligula Ado XV. However, I sort of have a slightly different interpretation, which is that, so at the site of a swelling due to something like heart failure, part of the reason it sometimes swells is because due to complicated causes relating to osmosis within the blood vessels, the surrounding tissues fill up with water. And so if it's cut, it wouldn't necessarily look like water, but it'll look maybe like more diluted blood that comes out. And I wonder if that is why it's called this like water that comes out when you slice a swelling on the body. So there's one of two different translations. You can either translate it as pus or serum, which is what would fill those kind of swellings in the body. And I'm not a medical doctor, but I've consulted with some of my family members who are medical doctors, and they've sort of advised me on what this might be in these contexts. So thank you, Mother, for consulting on that. And what this would mean is Vara Havirfoltfinget would mean he has fully taken up or received the Vara. Now this, I'm personally reading this as saying that he has sort of gotten a lot of swelling, he's gotten very sick, and that's the reason why this incantation is necessary. And part of the reason also why I don't necessarily take but Hanridu, Bardi Hanridu, all that seriously is because of what we're going to see next in the very last line. Fly braut Ritha, which means it's a direct address to the cause, to the fever itself, and it's saying, fly away, O fever. And, Bat Han Rithu is past tense, and as is Bardi Han Rithu. But if this person for whom the artifact is intended had actually overcome the fever, it would be kind of pointless. And you certainly wouldn't need to say, leave to the fever itself. So my suspicion is that I'm not fully sure. Maybe it's meant to be an ideal statement, like we would like for him to have beaten it, although in that case you would expect a subjunctive. It might refer to Ural, like Ural beat the fever, Ural struck the fever. Again, very confusing here, hard to tell. There's probably a whole world in early medieval Scandinavia of witchcraft and these kinds of magical activities which drew on a well of modern knowledge that we just have almost entirely lost in the present day, and we get these brief glimpses of them in these runic inscriptions. And by the way, I will put a link in the description to the Runor database where you can see another English translation, and you can see a transliteration of this runic artifact along with some other documentation pertaining to its finding. So once again, from start to finish, what this is this poem is Jures orðið vaxna og kroki, bat hanriðu barði hanriðu, og sita sarð sorðaran, varða hafið fullt finget, flu braut ríða. Which means Ural's untwisting rose out of the hook. He beat the fever. He struck the fever. He then fucked the house of injuries. He has fully taken up the serum. Go away, you fever. And so presumably this incantation would have been said for somebody, maybe this would have been hung over the bed of somebody who was sick from a fever, which might have been caused by septicemia, hence the reference to the wounds, the sarda, which could have become infected and therefore gotten the person to have a fever. And they may have hung this over his bed in the hopes that this person would recover. And I think it's a he, just based on the but hun, So there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. There are going to be a lot more runic videos coming to my channel because I have had to learn a fuck ton about Old Norse and Old English runes for my PhD research, which took an unexpected turn. And so I'm going to make use of that and make videos about it on my channel. If you have specific questions about runes, feel free to ask and I'll try my best to find an answer, although I'm not an expert on runes by any means. If you want me to teach you Norse, well, I probably wouldn't teach you Norse, but Old English or Gothic or Latin, then you can subscribe to my Patreon. It'll be linked in the description of this video, and I provide tuition there at lower than market rates. You can also join my Discord server. We have a lot of resources for language learning there. We've recently added Old English, and I tend to post these pictures as images before I turn them into videos, so you can get early access to them there. And also, thank you, by the way, to my 3 Patreon supporters who are watching this video. One of them is Only Dog on the Left, and I can't remember the names of 2 others, and I haven't yet gotten verification that they want their names to be mentioned at the end, so I'll hold back on that until I get confirmation from them. But thank you to all 3 of you nonetheless for supporting this channel and making more videos possible. And yeah, until next time, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day. Bye everyone!